Ferdinand Magellan set out from Spain in 1519 on the first voyage of circumnated the globe with 5 ships and complement of 264 crew. 3 years later, in 1522, only the one ship, the Victoria, returned to the Spain with 18 men. The Philippines, with the death of Magellan, the expedition sighted the island of Samar on March 26, 1521. Magellan was welcomed by Raha, Colombo, and Siagu. He named the island the archipelago of San Lazaro, erected a cross, and claimed the lands for Spain. The friendly Raha took Magellan to Cebu to meet Raha Humabon. Humabon and 800 Cebuano were baptized as Christians. Magellan agreed to help Raha Humabon put down Lapu-Lapu, a rebellious Datu, on the nearby island of Mactan. In a battle between Spanish soldiers and Lapu-Lapu warriors, Magellan was killed on April 27. Disputes over women caused relations between Raha Humabon and the remaining Spaniards to deteriorate. The Cebuanos killed 27 Spaniards in a skirmish, and the Spaniards, deciding to resume their exploration, departed to Cebu. The Spanish did not develop the trade potential of the Philippines' agricultural or mineral resources. The colony was administered from Mexico, and its commerce centered of the galleon trade between Canton and Acapulco, in which Manila functioned secondarily as an interport. Smaller Chinese junk brought silk and porcelain from Canton to Manila, where the cargoes were reloaded on galleons bound for Acapulco and the Spanish colonies in the Americas. The Chinese goods were paid for in Mexican silver. Spanish rule had two lasting effects on Philippine society: the universal conversion of the population to Roman Catholicism and the creation of landed elite. Although under the direct order of Philip II, the conversion of the Philippines to Christianity was not to be accomplished by force. The monastic order of the Augustine, Dominicans, Franciscan, Recollets, and Jesuits set off their missionary duties with purpose, unable to extirpate the indigenous pagan beliefs by coercion and fear. Philippine Catholicism incorporates a deep substrate of native customs and ritual. When the missionaries spread through the colony to found their parishes and estates in the barangay, the officials of the civil administration preferred to stay in Manila and govern indirectly through the traditional barangay dato or village chief. Although the traditional kingship organization of the barangay had maintained communal use of land, the Spanish governor brought with the feudal nation of land tenure with encomienderos and subordinate vassals. The traditional village chiefs became a class of landed nobility with considerable local authority. The creation of a privileged landed holding elite, on whom most of the rural population was dependent as landless tenants, introduced a class division in Philippine society that has been the perennial sources of social discontent and political strife ever since.
In most villages, the priest and the local principal or notable represented between them Spanish authority, the frequency of religious order, and the oligarchy of the landholders were the twin pillars of colonial society, whose main interests were in keeping their position of authority and privilege. The Spanish hold on the Philippines first began to weaken in 1762, when the British briefly captured Manila during the 7 Years' War. In support of the British invasion, the long persecuted Chinese merchant community rose in revolt against the Spanish authority. The Treaty of Paris returned Manila to Spain at the end of the war, but with increasing diversion of the China trade to Britain, and even more importantly, with the irretrievable loss of prestige and respect in the eyes of its Filipino subjects. And merchants could ever more easily circumvent the monopolies and enter the Philippines trade. The colonial government had always operated at the financial loss that was sustained by subsidies from the galleon trade with Mexico. Increased competition with foreign traders finally brought the galleon trade with the Acapulco to an end in 1815. After its recognition of Mexican independence in 1821, Spain was forced to govern the colony directly from Madrid and to find new sources of revenue to pay for the colonial administration. Economics during Spaniards period. Economic and political institutes were also altered under Spanish impact, but perhaps less truthfully than in the religious realm. The priests tried to move all the people into pueblos or villages surrounding the great stone churches, but the dispersed demographic patterns of the old barangays largely persisted. Nevertheless, the datus once hereditary position becomes subject to Spanish appointment. Agricultural technology changed very slowly until the late 18th century, as shifting cultivation gradually gave way to more intensive sedentary farming. Partly under the guidance of the friars, the socio-economic consequence of the Spanish policies that accompanied this shift reinforced class differences. The datus and other representatives of the old noble class took advantage of the introduction of the Western concept of absolute ownership of land to claim as their own fields cultivated by their various retainers. Even though traditional land rights had been limited to usufruct, these heirs of pre-Spanish nobility were known as the Principalia and played an important role in the friar-dominated local government.
The 19th century. By the late 18th century, political and economic changes in Europe were finally beginning to affect Spain and the Philippines. The important as a stimulus to trade was the gradual elimination of the monopoly enjoyed by the galleon to Acapulco. The last galleon arrived in Manila in 1815, and by the mid-1830s, Manila was open to foreign merchants. Almost without restriction, the demand for Philippine sugar and abaca grew apace and the volume of exports to Europe expanded even further after the completion of the Suez Canal in 1869. The growth of commercial agriculture resulted in the appearance of a new class. Alongside the handholding of the church and the rice estate of the pre-Spanish nobility, there arose haciendas of coffee, hemp, and sugar, often the property of the enterprising Chinese-Filipino mestizos. Some of the families that gained prominence in the 19th century have continued to play an important role in Philippine economics and politics. Not until 1863 was there public education in the Philippines, and even then the church controlled the curriculum. Less than one-fifth of those who went to school could read and write Spanish, and far fewer could speak it properly. The limited higher education in the colony was entirely under clerical direction, but by the 1880s, many sons of the wealthy were sent to Europe to study. Their nationalism and passion for reform blossomed in the liberal atmosphere. Out of this talent group of overseas Filipino students arose what came to be known as the propaganda movement. Magazines, poetries flourished. Jose Rizal, these movements' most brilliant figure, produced two political No Limitang Heroy and El Filibusterismo, which had wide impact in the Philippines. In 1892, Rizal returned home and formed the La Liga Filipina, a modest reform-minded society loyal to Spain and the writ of no word for independence. But Rizal was quickly arrested by overly fearful Spanish, exiled to a remote island in the south, and finally executed in 1896.